Mr. Qureshi, we have been discussing few aspects of how you and your party wants to run Pakistan if inducted into power. But the subject that we are going to discuss today is a very disturbing subject from many viewpoints. Pakistan, there are now questions that whether Pakistan is economically viable or not even. Pakistan has been living beyond its means, much beyond its means. How do you see? Is Pakistan economically a viable state?
Well, I think you used the word. You said living beyond our means, and that is the reality. Unfortunately, the way it has been managed, Pakistan, people have been living beyond their means. There has not been sufficient creation of value, and that's the function of any economy. There has been destruction of value in many respects. And in terms of viability, the issue, as far as I'm concerned, is exactly what you said. It's a matter of living beyond. It's a matter of mismanagement and living beyond one's means. In terms of economic viability, I think Pakistan is a wonderfully sort of viable state. It is a state that has so many resources that one doesn't know where to start. And there are examples of states which have almost nothing in terms of natural resources, who have gone on to become very, very successful. So there is no excuse for Pakistan not to be successful or viable.
And you think that budget, despite rising defense expenses, despite the increasing amount of debt servicing, Pakistan can manage its budget today and tomorrow?
I think the issue has to be, I mean, you are talking about immediate problems that we are facing. What I'd like to look at and address really, the reason why what you are mentioning is not relevant is because it's been grossly mismanaged. And we have to assume that this management, the leadership really of the country, cannot continue because they are a complete failure. And I don't mean to include in that just the present government. I mean to include in it all the democratic governments, all non-democratic governments, all people who have been in government have mismanaged Pakistan and have not developed the economy the way it should have been possible and developed it to the extent of its potential. So the question in terms of today's budget and today's deficits, of course, if these same people go on running it, it will be run into the ground and someone will have to pick up the pieces. But assuming you can get good management, assuming you can get good people in there, there is nothing we can't do with this country and really take it to the front ranks of the countries in the world.
And you and your party has got a working plan ready to turn it around?
Yes, we do have a plan. Let me just say that the plan is not very difficult or complicated. The plan is not something that requires rocket scientists to come up from outside and develop and implement. The plan is really just good common sense, which unfortunately is not forthcoming from our leadership most of the times. It's common sense, it's honesty, it's making proper use of the resources that are available, and just using all this and once you apply just these 2 or 3 things to the economy, you'll immediately see a difference.
So you are convinced that Pakistan could be turned around?
I know Pakistan can be turned around. I'm absolutely convinced.
Let's get to the specifics. What is to be the vehicle of growth? In past years, either it has to be either export oriented, or at times consumerism has worked as vehicle of growth. How do you see?
Well, I am not someone who believes in consumerism. Let's understand what an economy should try and do. What any economy should have as its basic objective. And it should be, in my opinion, is that the welfare of a country's people should be the priority of any economic policy. To make sure that there is no hunger, that people have the services that they expect from the state, such as water, such as power, such as healthcare, that they are educated, that they can live in security without fear, These are I think, the elements of a successful economy. Um, Having said that, you obviously have to have a strategy to deliver all this. And and the ability to deliver it depends on your economic successfulness. I mean, you have to generate the resources to provide all this, because none of this can be done without resources. And the resources have to be generated through the economy. So when someone says consumerism, export-led, that's it can be any or all of these things. Basically, if you look at our economy structure, our natural strength is agriculture. We have wonderfully fertile land, we have a lot of water, and certainly that should be a starting point of where we look to develop it should allow us to be self-sufficient. For instance, in food, we should be absolutely self-sufficient. We by and large are. There are problems that happen, but I think that's a sector that needs to be looked at and developed carefully. The central weakness that I see now in our economy is the absolute collapse, if you will, of industry. And that's a sector that needs to be looked at very, very carefully. And that's where we will focus a lot of our attention, because if you do not have industrial power, you do not carry any weight in the community of nations. Because you are, I mean, this is a world of technology. And where is the technology used? The technology is used in industry. It's generated there, it's put to use there. And if you are unable to harvest the benefit of technology through industry, you are missing out on what today is all about. So industry has to be promoted in a very, very structured and careful way, and that's what we are planning to do.
There are certain issues which are afflicting Pakistani society. In fact, they are tearing apart the society, and I'll raise them one by one. And if you could, for instance, employment, major issue. How do you want to address that?
You have to address it, of course, in all possible ways, and you have to. Unemployment has two reasons. One, of course, there is the economy is not growing sufficiently. It's so to absorb the people coming into the job market. The other is that perhaps the people coming to the job market are not the people the market needs or wants. They are not the trained people that we need. And another issue is that maybe there are too many people coming into the market. Absolutely. And I think we suffer from a bit of all three, in the sense that, of course, the economy is mismanaged because the people who run it have no idea how to run it. There is a mismatch also because we do not have the right educational structure in place. There is too much of an emphasis on college, university type education, blue collar education, if I can. White collar education, if I can call it that. Everyone wants to go and graduate and get an MA and that's what the system seems to be doing. It seems to be generating MAs and BAs by the thousands, and this is degrading the value of those degrees, and it's not producing people who can do real work. And what needs to be done there in education is that you have to have a program of technical education where people can also develop skills that are really needed in the economy. Skills like carpenters and technicians and mechanics, and there are a whole range of skills that are needed in any economy that are not now being provided through a structured approach. They're being done in a haphazard, ad hoc kind of way, where people just stumble into those professions. So that needs to be addressed. And finally, the third point is very, very important, and that has to do with controlling population growth. I mean, we are just, there is no strategy, there is no concern about this explosion that is continuing to occur in Pakistan's population. And if it continues like this, for sure, no matter what you do with the economy and how you manage it, ultimately there will be no jobs because there will be just too many people. So it's a kind of a integrated approach that one has to take. It's a holistic approach. You cannot separate one element from the other and just focus on it. You have to look at the whole problem and attack the whole problem.
And is it possible to bring people above the poverty line, eradicating poverty? Is it possible?
I see no problem. I see no problem. Given what we have in terms of our resources, it should not be a problem. But you have to manage it. You have to plan for it.
There are some figures which say that something like 70 or 80 million Pakistani people are below poverty line in real terms.
Yes, I'm not saying that it will happen overnight, but I am saying that it is possible. And certainly it should be the objective of any government to bring its people out of poverty, and this should be the top priority. And in some sense, everything that a government does should be addressed at this basic problem.
So that's the prime concern.
It's in terms of the economy, it's absolutely the prime concern.
You mentioned of industry, lack of energy or electricity, let me put it this way, is literally crippling the industry in Pakistan.
Yeah.
How are you going to address this scenario?
Again, just gross mismanagement is responsible for this. Gross mismanagement, and at multiple levels. Certainly generation people, the governments that have been in power, these are long-term projects. You cannot decide today and that you are out of power and expect it to come by December like the minister there was promising. It's not going to happen. You have to plan for these, and we have just not planned, and it has to be addressed. So we have to now move towards putting in the generating capacity, and the solutions can't be short term. Like these days you see this talk of rental power plants and all that. This is nonsense. I mean, this is extremely expensive power. There is money changing hands under the table. Foreign companies are coming in and impoverishing an impoverished country even further. So this is, these are just these little games our politician friends are playing, and it will enrich them at the expense of the people, and it won't be long-term power. You have a rental contract, it expires, you're done.
You mentioned of agriculture as the backbone of Pakistan's economy. Water, in the current environmental scenario, keeping in view the environmental scenario as well, water is going to be a scarce commodity.
Yes.
And we are already facing a very difficult situation as far as water is concerned. So do you think we have enough resources, or we will have to do something to generate enough water to keep our lands fertile and keep them?
Well, we have this wonderful gift of these rivers that pass through our lands. And now the issue of running out of water, I think what you perhaps are referring to is climate change. That if the rains fail, or if the ice caps in the Hindu Kush
ice is already melting,
is not replenished at the rate it has traditionally been replenished, then the water flows will decrease. Now that's something you have very little, of course, any one of us have very little control over, and there is a realization that this is happening, and if not in the government, at least there are people in the NGO sector who are already looking at this issue, and there is an organization called Mustaqbil Pakistan which is doing a lot of good work and trying to bring this to the attention of people, and you have to sort of work with these people, see what ideas they have, what they've developed, put in the sort of conservation measures, the kind of backup measures that you will need. And I think technology allows you to do a lot of things, which allows you to use your water more carefully. There is a lot, for instance, in our methods of agriculture, there is a lot of water that is lost in transmission, and that can be looked at. It can include like linings for canals. It can include better irrigation methods, the use of drip irrigation, for instance, instead of the kind of flooding that we do now, and a lot of water is lost to evaporation or lost to the ground. So there are a lot of things that can be done, but again, the issue is you have to have someone in power who appreciates these and then does something about it.
Because water is already a point of friction between different provinces.
Yes, and I think that this will have to be managed.
In fact, lower Indus, if you come down,
Yeah.
it's getting dry.
Yeah, I think this has to be looked at, and it has to be managed. I don't believe that there are no solutions to problems. I think every problem has a solution. If you put your mind to it, you can solve it. Sorry, go ahead.
Solutions such as Kalabagh Dam, you mean?
That's a good question. I'm personally not in favor of very large dams. They do a lot of damage. There is some short-term gain. They cost a lot of money. They displace a lot of people. There is some evidence to suggest they result in seismic changes which can cause earthquakes, and they have limited lifespans. So I'm not in favor of these large dams. I'd be much more inclined to look at the concept of barrages, for instance, to raise river levels along certain points of the path, so that you look at the Sakhar barrage, for instance. It's a magnificent structure, and it was built, I think more than 100 years ago, and it's been serving our needs for so long. And these are perhaps the sort of I think we have to give up this idea of these massive foreign-funded projects that are of limited use and limited lifespan. They solve a problem, but temporarily, and they result in huge debts, and they cause a lot of environmental and human damage also. I mean, whole populations, whole villages have to be relocated from their ancestral lands, from their graveyards. It's not right. It's not right that you should be doing this kind of thing, and the government insisting that people have to move from their places to make way for a dam. And plus they carry this huge political baggage, where, as you can see, there is a big dispute now with Sindh saying, we won't...
Sindh and WFP as well.
Yeah. So why get into this? Let's not get into these controversial issues which are of limited economic value, perhaps.
Let's get into some broader issues. At a point in time, Reaganism, as it's being called as today, that was in place all around, and people were saying that's the real medication to the global, all the afflictions, all the problems of the world. Today it seems no. Now, everything at that point in time was being handed over to the private sector. The recent bubble burst that we have all witnessed, people are reverting perhaps to the other extreme. How do you see this private-public partnership really in terms of Pakistan even?
I think we have made a huge mistake in terms of privatization. I think the government had no right and no business to privatize public assets. It has resulted in a lot of damage, and you can see it in some sectors. You can see it in power, for instance, where there has been a huge loss, where things have not been planned, where power is continuously becoming more expensive. So my take on privatization. There are two types of privatization one has to talk of in Pakistan's context. One has to do with public utilities, such as power, such as water, such as to some extent transport, the railway system, the telecommunication system. These are public utilities, and my feeling is that the government should be in the business of running these, because in the end they are providing a public service. Now you charge for that service, but it's a public service, and the government should have the ability to price those services in a way that is consistent with national policy. Now, if you hand over these services to the private sector, that ability disappears, because the private sector now will be pricing for profit. And this is not fair. It is not fair on the people of the country. One, you have taken away this asset, a very valuable asset. And in selling it, you get a one-time gain, which is wasted away by our corrupt politicians. And you have permanently transferred this asset to a private party. So that kind of privatization, if our party ever comes to power, will be out, and we will attempt to recover assets that have already been nationalized. We will do this, of course, in the fairest of possible ways. We will compensate people for whatever we then take back from them in a fair market-adjusted way. So that part of our policy is quite clear. We are not for privatization of government utilities. I just want to give you one example. I just want to further emphasize why we're not in favor of it. Let me just take an example. Fortunately, despite the efforts of many people, the railway system has not been privatized. But let me give you an example. If the railway system, for instance, was in the private sector, had gone into the private sector, you would have lost the ability to use that system as an economic tool. What I mean by that is that, let's say there is an outlying community somewhere where the traffic it's away from the main corridors where most of the traffic is on the railway system, which is down the center of the country, Karachi to Peshawar. That's the main line, and that's where most of the traffic is. Now, if you were to hand over this asset to the private sector, there would be no incentive for this sector, the private sector, private ownership, to develop service into areas where you as the government feel that there should be a service, even if the service runs at a loss, to service the people, to perhaps provide, let's say there is an area where a rich agricultural area potentially where there are no farm to market access. So the government may decide to put in a railway line to that area, which will not be a profitable railway line, but which is in the interest of the overall economy. So that's why, that's just one example, and it applies across the board to utilities. The same applies to power. You extend power somewhere, if it's in the private sector, what incentive is there for them to invest a lot of money for just a few subscribers?
But in certain major economies, such as the US, the telecom sector is in private sector.
The telecom sector went into the private sector
Yes.
In the Reagan years. I mean, it was not,
And it's performing well.
This is a question that people have to, the telecom sector is not a very good example because it has been subject to very rapid technological change, and it is not what it used to be, which was just landlines. So there could be an argument, perhaps, in terms of saying, perhaps in that sector, and in that sector alone, one might see a role for the private sector. But I think otherwise, I don't see a role at all in any of the other sectors.
But there's an issue of inefficiency in public sectors.
Yes, there is inefficiency, but that's not an excuse to sell them off. Now, if there is inefficiency, they should be managed better, and this is a challenge for the government to take on and say, look, if we have agencies that we are managing, we have to do it in a competent and professional way.
So you think that the government has got a role in these sort of sectors as well?
The government must have a role in these sectors. It must, because
it doesn't then takes its attention and focus away from the real issue that the government is faced with.
Actually, this is part of the real issue. This is part of the issue of providing power. If you set aside telecom, where things have changed a lot, it's no more laying lines in the ground, and a lot of it is very, very different now. But if you take all the other aspects, if you take the rail system, if you take power, if you take water, who else is going to do it but the government? These assets are policy tools, and they should be deployed to further those policy ends. Now, if the only benefit that could come by transferring these assets to the private sector is what you say, efficiency. But I don't feel that it is justifiable to transfer these assets just because you are not able to get the maximum possible efficiency. Efficiency is something. I'm not condoning it, but I don't think that's a reason. I think there is an obligation on all governments to minimize. This is their job. They're supposed to be looking after these things, and if they're not doing it well, then they ought to be removed in the next election. But to transfer these assets to someone else and say, we can't handle it, that's not part of the game here.
There's a section which believes that basically is the concept of security, of national security, that is behind the line of argument that you are taking right now. Is that so?
No, I don't think. My concern is not national security on this level. This is just a purely economic assessment
and social issue.
And social issue that if you want to develop this economy, you have to have the ability to provide these services anywhere you think is necessary. And this will not happen if it's under private control.
And do you think that then it has to be subsidized, some of these services?
Absolutely, it has to be subsidized. Absolutely, where you think a subsidy is necessary, you should use it. I mean, this is.
But then doesn't it promote inefficiency?
I think this issue of efficiency has been used as the argument for all this privatization, and I think it's somewhat of a red herring. It's the issue is that you are a government. You have a set of problems that you have to solve. You'd have to try and do your best. If there are inefficiencies, let me just put it this way: it is not written that a government has to be inefficient. It is not carved in stone that a government cannot run something efficiently. It's a challenge, and I think governments should rise to the challenge. Our government, they can't rise to the challenge right now for sure, with the people who run it. But it's possible. It's not impossible. And really, if you want to take this country forward, you can't do it without full control over these assets. You can't do it.
Are you referring to something of a technocrats putting up as running a government?
No, I'm not referring to technocrats running a government at all. I'm just saying that these assets have to be under government control, and the government must control what to do with them, how to do it, how to price their services. This must be, even if it results in inefficiencies.
Let's get to something else. Pakistani stock markets. There has been a lot of discussion in recent years that there has been speculation has been playing a part in it, and there were people who were putting in money and taking it off and on as per their whims, and that deprives the common people of their assets in big way. What do you think is the role of the stock markets in the emerging scenario?
Actually, I think the role of stock markets has been distorted in all economies, and you are seeing the latest crisis is just the start of the blowback from that distortion. Our feeling, our view, is that the role of stock markets in any economy, but because we are really concerned about Pakistan, let's just talk about our context. The role of a stock market should be to provide a mechanism for long-term financing of projects, whether these are industrial projects or whether they are agricultural projects. It is an intermediary, a mechanism that is put into place so that investors can move, so that private money can be used to develop industry or projects related to agriculture and so on. I think stock markets should have a long-term outlook. What has happened now, unfortunately, and what we will try our best to put an end to, is the use of stock markets as a kind of a casino, where many players come in and they manipulate it, they use it for short-term gains, which is detrimental to the nation. I mean, people do make short-term profits. Some of them are very marvelous, substantial profits. But that is kind of short-circuiting the purpose of a stock market. The purpose of a stock market is and should be to provide stable, long-term capital. And that has been undermined by all these speculators. And they're not just local speculators now. Foreign funds come in. They're free to come in. They will one day bring in several $100 million or tens of millions of dollars and move it out the next day. Now, for a stock market like Pakistan, this is extremely disruptive, and it doesn't bring, let's put it this way, it doesn't bring to us as a country the long-term investments that are needed, because investments that are made on the ground are long-term investments.
So are you going to put some restrictions on
We will absolutely put some restrictions. We will put restrictions on speculation. Most likely we will put restrictions on international access to our markets because it is purely speculative in nature. I mean, what is the net result of what has happened is that short-term deposits are financing long-term assets. And this is unstable and undesirable. And that's what we will seek to end. We will try and restore through whatever mechanisms we can bring to bear the stock market in Pakistan, or the markets that exist in Pakistan. We will try and return them to their role where investors are long-term investors and where their role is to finance the development of industry.
But are you realizing that that could be a great disruption? For instance, Karachi Stock Exchange, its index could go down from something 9,000 plus right now to something like 3,000-4,000 at a point in time.
It's possible. One has to prepare for all possibilities. But I think doing the right thing is more important than sort of short-term disruptions to something that is already very, very short-term. I mean, this index could go down to 3,000 in any case, whether we do something or not. Something happens, some political incident somewhere could, and it has in the recent past. You have seen things happen. So I wouldn't hold that. I wouldn't use. I mean, I wouldn't be worried about that preventing us from taking the sort of decisions that are in the long-term interest of Pakistan. That's our primary interest, the long-term success and viability of Pakistan.
Do you think the very concept of globalization is finally going to meet its natural death?
I think it certainly seems to have started to confront this possibility. It's the recent crisis, and let me tell you, it's not over yet. This crisis still exists. The basic underlying problems remain, and those problems are basically that there is too much manufacturing capacity now in place in Far East Asia, and that's balanced against a demand that has permanently been destroyed in the West. And what has been done to stabilize the situation is more of the same. Governments in the West have borrowed hugely, whereas previously the citizens were borrowing and financing stuff that couldn't be financed any other way. Now you see the government's doing the same thing, and this thing has not finished. We are not yet over, and I think by the time this storm has passed, this is still a lull before another impending storm, possibly more substantial, because you've played your final card. The governments of these Western nations have played their final cards. They've put in loads of money to stabilize a system that's very difficult now to stabilize. So fundamental change has to take place, and there has to be a realization that this globalization thing is not working. It will not work. There has to be, you have to move away from this concept of unlimited growth. The world, the concept has become, the idea, the economic underpinning of success seems to be growth, and growth. And, this is something that doesn't work. Anyone who knows the reality of a geometric progression knows that you ultimately come up against limits. And we are starting to come up against some of those limits. So the paradigm, if you will, of what is economic success has to change. It has to change more to a gentler, kinder concept. It must not anymore be personal wealth, personal income, people wanting to become rich at whatever cost. I think it has to be more social in its nature, more that, let's help everyone get out of their problems. Let's make sure that everyone has enough.
And by everyone, you mean within
society?
Yes, I'm talking the globe.
No, I'm talking primarily of Pakistan. But I think on a global basis, this also has to be addressed. And I think these issues are coming up. There is a big blowback now also in America, where you're seeing this huge, the big noise now about the bonuses of bankers, where you have some individuals making tens of millions of dollars a year, and other people who, are living below the poverty line and have to be fed out of food kitchens. Now there is a basic issue of social justice here, and America is a red-blooded capitalist state, but even there, this issue is coming up. They think it's gone too far. This capitalism thing has gone too far.
And
they may not put it in those many words, but certainly the feelings behind it are this, that there has to be somewhat more, a bit more of social justice.
So the very concept of wealth generation through the banking system, which was basically based on interest, and that is coming to an end, that era is going to come to an end?
Actually, that's a very, very complicated question. It involves many, many different things. And I don't think we have the time to answer all of those or discuss all of those today. Let me just say that the way things were going in the past cannot continue. The way that the banks were generating credit cannot continue. And to some extent, to those of us who are of somewhat of a religious bent, there appears to be a certain, one starts to appreciate the divine wisdom, at least in our religion where interest is not allowed. One begins to see of the excesses that have taken place in such systems, and one begins to see the net end result of this, where things are just completely out of control, and debt creation, and the whole structure is falling on its foundations now. So it's food for thought. I mean, it really is food for thought. Now, if you are an economy which is not based on this kind of an interest-based system, you'd never have these problems to start with. So there is a certain, I for one, it's an eye-opener. People say, people make excuses in our religion to justify interest, and they say, oh, the riba doesn't really mean interest, it means excessive, it means usury. But the Quran and the religious texts are very clear that it does mean interest. It does mean taking an extra payment for money that you lend to anyone. Now, is there wisdom in there that we as humans have not yet failed to anticipate? And I think there is. I think I think it is possible to build economies without interest, and things will be slower, but things will happen, and perhaps they will happen in a more stable, sustainable kind of way.
That's a very interesting comment. One final question, then in the perspective of what you have just said right now, how do you see Pakistan's economic and financial system, or how do you visualize that it should be in another 5-10 years?
Well, assuming that, of course, assuming that the present political parties are not the ones who are in charge, and I mean either one of them, there are two.
Or how it should be, rather.
Yeah, how it should be depends on who's running it. And certainly, if we are given this privilege to have anything to do with it, you will see changes that you have not seen since Pakistan was founded. And I think these will be changes for the better. They will demand efficiency, they will demand honesty, they will be policies based on self-supporting policies, self-financing policies. We will be thinking out of the box, we will be doing things that have not been done before. And the net result, sooner or later, will end up being to the benefit of all Pakistanis, rich and poor.
One final question. What would be your first few steps if you're inducted into power as far as the economy is concerned?
I think answering that question needs an assessment of the situation when we do get there, because things are changing. So I can't tell you right now at this point what the first few steps would be. It would have to depend on what the exact situation is at that time. But certainly we will initiate steps to bring back, some of the things we will do, which I can tell you, is initiate steps to bring back into public ownership the assets that have been thrown away right now. And there's one more thing I want to clarify if I can just take a few more minutes. When we were talking about the issue of privatization, There are two, and I mentioned that when we were talking about that there are two types of privatization. One has to do with public utilities. The other has to do with industry. Now here we have gone completely the wrong way. In other words, we believe that the government should have nothing to do with running industry. And the policies, decisions that were made during the first Bhutto government were completely wrong, where whole swaths of industry were nationalized. And this resulted in a destruction, a blow to Pakistan's economy from which it has still not recovered. I mean, it was a huge blow, where Pakistan was at the point of industrial takeoff, and this was sabotaged by some, a policy that is not understandable under any circumstances, where all of industry was nationalized. Now, unfortunately, we still have some remnants of that nationalization in existence. And these assets now, these industrial assets, our party believes the government has no business being in. So we will attempt to unload these assets, and the biggest one of these is the Pakistan steel mill, for instance. And this is not a viable mill. It must be shut down or sold. And I don't think there will be any buyers, because it's extremely old technology, extremely inefficient. The only viable step is to shut it down. Of course, there are a lot of people who work there, so you have to do it in a careful kind of way so that people are accommodated and it doesn't result in a sudden flood of unemployment. But it certainly has to be shut down. It certainly has to be shut down, because the government is, the government cannot be an industry. This is where the private sector has to be involved, and this is where the private sector should be given a blank sort of slate to go ahead and do these things.
Although it's pretty different from what many people say, that Pakistani steel mills, for instance, that is from a security point of view. Pakistan needs steel mills.
I don't think Pakistan needs. I mean, Pakistan does need steel mills. Let's just put it this way, but not this one big one. There are many ways to make steel. This is an extremely expensive way to do it. There have been ideas proposed by Pakistani scientists based on Pakistani materials. Do you know the raw materials for this mill are imported all from outside? The coal comes from Australia, the ore comes from Brazil. It's crazy. And we have both of these things in Pakistan. We have iron ore, we have coal. So, it's an absolute white elephant, this project, and it has to go. That doesn't mean we won't have any steel capacity. We have to put in steel capacity, but these will be smaller, more flexible plants based on our own technology and on our own raw materials. And it can be done, and it will be done, inshallah.
So basically you intend to embark upon a revolutionary sort of...
I wouldn't use that word revolution, because it has contexts that are misleading, but certainly we will be doing things
differently.
Very, very differently. And I use the term out of the box, and it will be out of the box, out of the envelope, and it will be.
Good luck, Mr. Qureshi.
Thank you
so much.
I think